Welcome back, everybody. This is Eric and Chad here from Moss Pawn & Gun, and today we have another Gun Gripe episode for you. And we've been thinking about this subject for quite a while and kind of putting our thoughts together on it, and we want to talk about guns and how they relate to class struggle. I know that that's a really odd thing for us to consider in this modern age that we live in, but firearms and personal protection and the right to defense has not always been something that is available to the common man. We look at, back in the old days, back during, the days of kings and queens and everything like that, a lot of people in society were always very oppressed and very held down, and they weren't able to have military arms or any type of gun or object that they could defend themselves with, nor were they encouraged to take on that type of behavior.
Well, a lot of times if you were caught with a weapon in your household, you might be, put in jail, put under the castle.
Exactly. Well, going on to the early days, for instance, say that you were a farmer, okay, and you had a bow, all right, and you had arrows for that bow. Well, if the law at the time, if the sheriff or whoever the lawful authority was at the time caught you with anything other than game tip arrows, if they caught you with combat tipped arrows, oh, well, obviously you're not hunting game with this bow, you're out trying to rob someone. The bows couldn't have a certain draw strength. A lot of people don't know that. If you were a farmer back then and you lived in, feudal England or somewhere like that, you could not have a longbow over a certain draw strength because they would deem that bow to be a bow consistent with combat use and not consistent with just hunting game. So that is so odd that even back then there was still this just convoluted thing when it came to protection. It was like, you have that bow because you're trying to kill His Majesty's soldiers, or you're trying to rob us, or rob our convoys, or whatever. And it's just so crazy to think that even back then that they were worried about draw strength. They were worried about what type of arrow a person had in their possession.
Well, not to change the subject right off the bat, but I read something the other day where there's some crazy senator somewhere, or representative, that's talking about guns that are too accurate.
Too accurate?
Too accurate for civilians to own.
Too accurate for civilians to own.
Yeah.
Well, that's a completely different thing. But
it just came to mind.
But not so much, though, when you look at class struggle. So, so getting back to the concept of class struggle, I mean, so where does class struggle matter today? How does it matter in today's market?
Well, I mean, when you look at today's market, I mean, you have goods and services and whatnot that are offered on different scales. I mean, you have, poverty level, okay, and then you have the super rich, and there's luxuries that are, available to the super rich that obviously are not available to the people on the poverty scale or whatever, or even in the middle class. I mean, some of us, we can't exactly go out and afford, a $10,000 Barrett that's hanging above our heads, right off the bat, but you can afford maybe a $160 High Point,
right?
So I mean, there's different cars and things like that you can own. There's cheap cars, there's expensive cars, luxury cars. Yeah. I mean, there are what could be considered luxury guns as well. I mean, you may not need, a $4,000 bolt action where you can get by with a $200, used, a $200 Mosin, or even a used bolt gun like a old Winchester Mall 70 or something like that might be kind of beat up, but it still works. It'll still get the job done.
And that's exactly the case. That's exactly what we're getting at. So I think that even in the firearms world, just like other areas of society, it just seems like people tend to, there's always that identifiable class struggle that goes into everything they're doing. You guys know, it's like keeping up with the Joneses.
Well, people look down on you if you own a particular firearm. And that's one of the other things we're getting at too is, you got gun owners out there that if you don't own the latest and greatest, or you don't own, a $2,000 rifle with a $3,000 optic with, a $300 set of rings on there, and it's match tuned, and you've got an optical ranging system, and you've got all this hunky-dory fancy crap, then you're not nothing. If you're out there trying to plink with a Mosin or something like that, people like that, sometimes, not all the time, they might look down on you for that, and you might think, well, what the hell? I'm just trying to shoot my gun out here. I don't want to be badgered because of what I own, who I am, or what kind of money I make.
Right.
They want to really show their colors.
They do, and I guess that's part of the freedom of being American. I mean, if you want to, spend all your money on everything that's cool and gun related, or a cool car or whatever, and then flaunt it off to your buddies or whatever, that's fine. But there is a class struggle involved in it, because you see people. The gun industry, to me, is just so different, though. The whole thing about owning firearms, because if you know, if I'm a poor person, well, I still have the right to defend myself.
Oh, yeah,
just because I'm poor doesn't mean I can't buy a gun and defend myself.
Well, it doesn't mean that you have less right to, you know, defend yourself, or less of the Second Amendment right applies to you just because of your social status.
Right. Now, granted, there are, you know, more than one way to skin a cat, obviously. So, you know, sure, if all you can afford is a Sky CPX2 or a little High Point or something, a 9mm flying out of the end of a barrel doesn't know what it's coming out of. All it knows is it's going where you point it.
Nope.
So, you know, it's just so crazy. And we see a lot of that in here. You know, we're here in South Atlanta, so, you know, we get everything from, it's such a variety of cultures that come into the shop to buy things. And that's why the whole idea of talking about gun culture and almost, you know, the culture clash and class clash that goes along with it is because of the variety of people that we get in the shop here. Mm-hmm. Everybody from doctors and lawyers up in Buckhead here to people that are just trying to get by. You know, it's all different types.
Or, you know, young kids that come in that are just starting out, you know, buying guns or whatever the case may be. They might be fresh out of college, you know, living in an apartment. They don't have a lot of money, and they're looking for a gun to defend themselves with. You know, and a shop like us, we offer a variety of different firearms on different levels as far as value. I mean, you know, you might have, okay, a $200 shotgun. Well, it's going to get the job done just like the $800 shotgun, but it may not have all the bells and whistles. But, you know, that's the thing. I mean, if it's what you can afford and it's what you can use, then by all means, that's where you need to start.
Here's a really good example, okay? You know, so comparing back to the sheriffs back in the day, you know, judging people's, you know, draw strength on their bows or the type of arrows they were using, you know, and of course, the strength of the bow has something to do with what you intend to do with it. That same convoluted way of thinking also applies to an instance that I heard about in California where, and of course it's always California, but an instance I heard about in California where one of the rules that they set forth is that, okay, you can't sell a gun in California if it doesn't pass this melting test. So they came up with some bullshit melting test.
Melting test?
A melting test, a melting point test. So what they did is they said, all right, if this gun...
What are they melting?
Now, hang on.
Brain?
They're and this is just their way of thinking. And of course, it's because California doesn't want cheap guns. They don't want a less fortunate or you know, poorer person to have the right to defend themselves. So what they do is they say, all right, well, we're going to have a melting point. And if the gun is subjected to this amount of heat and it melts, then it does not qualify. But what they don't tell you is the temperatures are so, see, their thing was, oh, you can set the gun on the dash in a car and it'll melt.
Well, I mean, think about the High Point that we melted down. I mean, that slide is made out of a zinc alloy. It
took 625 degrees to melt.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you can melt lead at just, you know, pretty much the same temperature, slightly higher.
Right.
But it's just where are you going to experience 650 degrees just
so you can't buy cheaper, you know, pot metal guns in California for that reason. So that's another one of those examples where, they sit around and they go, all right, well, how are we going to make the common man not be able to defend themselves? You know, what's the cheapest gun out there? Okay, well, here it is. All right, well, let's find a way for this to not make its way here. And that's what they did. They came up with some...
That's kind of the same idea of like the NFA. You know, back when they developed the NFA or put the NFA into place, which is the National Firearms Act, you know, they imposed a $200 tax on things like machine guns, suppressors, short barrel shotguns, and that sort of thing, basically just based around all the crime and whatnot that was going on, trying to equalize between criminals and law enforcement personnel and whatnot, equalize the playing field. But, you know, back then, $200 tax on each one of those items was a hell of a lot of money. You know, but one of the things was that cost for that tax was not to go up with inflation over the years. That's why the tax has remained the same since 1934 to present day. So now $200 with inflation all around is $200. It's a lot of money still. I mean, to anybody. I mean, for the most part.
But back then, they purposely made that tax, that price, so
where it was a luxury. Yeah, it was a luxury item. That was a luxury tax. If you wanted to own something like that, then you were going to have to buy it, but then you were going to pay a tax on top of it, which would some cases, or in some cases, be someone's life savings at that time.
That's right.
You know, but today, if it was to go up with inflation, I mean, you'd be looking at $4 grand.
And $4 grand's a lot of money for just an average person to be able to come up with, especially if all you want to do is saw off a 12 gauge to 4 inches or 5 inches or something.
Or buy a suppressor or something like that. You're going to spend, you know, I mean, some of the cheap suppressors that are out there now or the inexpensive ones.
$300 suppressor.
Yeah, or less. I mean, you're paying $4 grand on that tax just to own that item. You know?
Right. Well, another good example is, and of course this is one of those things that gets thrown in our face all the time as gun owners, but you know, back when the Second Amendment was actually conceived and drafted and signed and everything like that, and the whole Constitution and all this, our founding fathers, you know, we had all of the civilians and military had the same firearms. You know, it wasn't uncommon for a male going to serve in the military to grab his rifle off the mantle and go fight, because that's all he had.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Well,
that's what it says. So I mean, they mean the same technology as the military, because back then
that was the height of technology.
The same thing.
That was the height of technology at that time, and it should not be any different nowadays. I mean, a lot of folks out there think that Second Amendment only applies to hunters. Okay, no, not at all. If I want to grab the AR off my mantle and go to battle, then I'll be damned if I'm not going to grab it and go. You know?
Right.
So.
And you know, again, it comes down to the whole, I guess, class struggle aspect of firearms ownership. And you know, when you look at all the things that have happened in the past, what's happened with the aristocracy in you know, Europe, and what happened with, you know, our moving over here and becoming an independent nation, us fighting for our independence, the way Americans are and the way we feel about gun culture and about guns in general is very well, you know, in line with the fact that we want to be independent of everyone else. So when we get all these foreigners that come on our videos and they go, okay, well, you know, we think the Americans are crazy because there's a gun in every corner. Well, but to us that's normal because we're a gun culture, we're gun people.
Well, you think back in World War II, you know, when Japan was thinking about invading the mainland here in the States, they didn't, because it was said that there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass.
Right.
And that was a time when firearms ownership was very much cherished in this country.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't seem to be as much today, I mean, in some cases, but...
Well, yeah. They knew that every common man had a gun.
Oh yeah, and that was very different from the society over in Japan, where firearms ownership was very much not allowed. I mean, you know, sometimes families had art swords, or they had historical swords that were passed down, but they had no way of, you know, firing a projectile at you. They didn't have guns in the household.
Right.
Only the military had guns, so
yeah,
they had
and
the power.
You know, there was a lot of propaganda going around during World War II from the Japanese side, you know, and they were making us all out to be gangsters and evil when we were all criminals.
Oh yeah.
And we shot at each other and we hated each other and all this sort of stuff. And there was just, you know, all of that propaganda was being put down the chain in order to make all of the Japanese citizens scared of GIs. And there were many cases where, you know, we were island hopping and Japanese civilians, sadly, were just jumping off cliffs because they thought that we were just these evil baby-killing people that were just going to grab them and rape them and kill them and steal everything.
Torture them, yeah, and just
they had it embedded in their minds that we were just these evil people, and of course it just turned out to not be the case. I mean, we wanted to help any way we could, but
well, even when we arrived on the mainland after dropping the bombs and such, you know, it was a long while before, you know, the citizenry actually saw what we were really trying to do over there.
Right.
You know, so
I know, but anyway, not to get off, you know, subject in any way, but you know, class struggle and gun culture are two things that, in my opinion, go hand in hand, because there are a lot of different people in the U.S. There's a lot of different cultures, different races, different religions, and we all have to kind of look at things towards a common goal, and we have to understand that we all have to live together and we all have to be happy together to some degree. Some of us might hate each other, some of us might like each other, but at the end of the day, we all have the same fundamental rights, and we have to be able to take advantage of those rights, but in a way that we can all peacefully coexist. And well, I think it's a very unique culture, I guess is the whole thing I'm trying to get at. The American culture is a unique culture.
Well, and something too, we don't want to alienate, you know, any of the customers who want to come to the store, anybody out there who might have a lot of money, and if you choose to spend it, you know, whatever way you wish, that's your right. I mean, that's the freedom and that's the liberty that we enjoy here.
Absolutely.
But, you know, everybody knows one of those gun snobs or those kind of people that, you know, really look down on folks who you know, may be lesser in society, or they might have less than them, or whatever the case may be, you know, and nobody really appreciates that kind of person. But that's not really what we're talking about. It's just mainly about the guns that are available out there and the price structure and whatnot, and the classes of people that are available to those guns.
And look, if you're a young person and you're watching this and you're going, well, one day I'm going to have a safe full of guns. Well, keep thinking that. That's how I was. When I was a young person, I mean, I was thinking, dang, there's so many guns I want to have. I want this gun, I want that gun, I want this gun. And I'll tell you what, I used to come in Moss all the time, even when I was, I don't want to say a little kid, but I was probably 16, 17 years old. 17. And I remember coming in Moss when I was 17, and I never got the first idea that anybody was being condescending towards me. I remember meeting Barry for the first time, and just remember thinking he was so nice to me, never gave me any problems. And well, to me, that's just how gun shops should be. They should be nice to people.
Not only gun shops, but, you know, it's common knowledge out there. Most gun owners are some of the most peaceful people that you'll ever know. They're some of the most cordial, courteous people that you will ever know. And you know, if you don't believe me, go to a gun range and just start talking people up, and you'll find out pretty quick. But you know, go back to what you said a while ago. I mean, we had a guy in here earlier. I mean, he's just kind of getting started and everything, and he's got like a 20 gauge bolt action. You know, one of the old like Sears and Roebuck.
I still got
20
one.
gauges. Oh yeah, it's a great gun. And he's got a little pump shotgun. You know, and if that's where you got to start to get your collection going, then by all means. I mean, you have to start somewhere. I mean, we didn't have, you know, all kinds of crazy guns when we were growing up. I mean, we had a little, Model 25 and, you know, some Model 60s. I mean, a couple of, we had a High Point 45.
I bought a High Point when I was young. I mean, we all do it. So you got to start somewhere, and there's nothing wrong with aspiring to, you know, have a nice collection and get into guns and really pursue it, you know, as an interest, and that's fine. You know, get it one piece at a time, like Johnny Cash said. So anyway, we appreciate you watching today's video. I know this one was kind of long and drug out, but I hope you enjoyed it. And we have many more gun gripes on the way, so I hope you'll join us next week here. And we have more on the way. We appreciate you watching.
Take care.